So our next guest represents an industry that single-handedly could revive the American economy. If we could get Washington, D.C. out of the way.
Absolutely.
If we could lose a little bit of that uncertainty. Jack Gerard is the president and CEO of the American Petroleum Institute. It's great to see you on Radio Row, Jack. How are you?
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Scott.
All right, so we're going to do a little snapshot version of your wonderful State of American Energy speech from last week. And I'm, as a North Dakotan, I am revved up about domestic energy production and the role it plays in our economy. And North Dakota's a living example. Newt, I thought, did a nice job at the debate the other day.
Absolutely.
Said, hey, North Dakota, 3% unemployment. Right. There's a reason.
That's right. It's a model we need to take throughout the entire country. We can if we get our policies right. So
yeah, I mean, and so the North Dakota is a pretty good example. It's an island of prosperity right now.
Absolutely. North Dakota, as you well know as a native there, our unemployment rate's about 3%. We've created thousands of jobs in North Dakota. The average wage in North Dakota is now $90,000, which is twice what the statewide average is for other employment. It's a big deal. It's a game changer, and we could replicate the North Dakota experience clear across this country with the right policies coming out of Washington.
Here's my concern. I think you're up against currently an administration and, unfortunately, a bureaucracy that is, more interested in environmental extremists and how loud they bark than they are about jobs. Is that too harsh?
Well, no, I think it's fair. What you see right now in the Keystone XL pipeline coming out of Canada all the way to the Gulf of Mexico, where we would bring in Canadian crude, refine it in the United States. Right now, that pipeline would create 20,000 jobs. It needs one permission of the United States President Obama, and to date, he's refused to grant permission to build that pipeline. So it's a perfect example of, we ought to create jobs in this country, but they're holding back, and the pipeline's a perfect example of it. Right now, he's punted that decision, saying, I want to wait till after the election.
And we've answered Missouri's concerns. We've done Nebraska, rather. I mean,
That's right.
I mean,
state of Nebraska.
His argument's gone, basically, right?
Well, yeah, people say, we need more time to look at the environment. We've looked at the environmental questions for over 3 years. We've had 2 comprehensive reviews of that pipeline, and even his own State Department has concluded it has no significant impact. I think the other thing, Scott's very important here is General Jim Jones, the President's former national security advisor, has now come out in strong support of this pipeline and said this is in the national interest. That's the decision before the President today, to talk about the national interest, and once he concludes it is, we'll start that pipeline, create 20,000 jobs. This is good for the country.
And by the way, there's been some rumors that the President Obama advance team was out in Williston, North Dakota recently talking about making an appearance there, so I assume that means he'd be taking credit for, of course, North Dakota jobs, which would be a bit laughable given his opposition to much of what the industry stands for. But it did make me think that possibly something might be in the works in the way of a decision in which he'd come out there and talk about how it's necessary, and he's, any thought on where this is at or whether he's actually going to come along on this?
Well, as you know, the President punted the decision and said, I really want to make this decision after the election, so he doesn't have to upset any part of what he considers to be his political base.
But the tax deal changed that, didn't it?
It did, and it gives him essentially till February 21 to make that decision. Again, all he has to do is declare it in the national interest, and we're well on our way. Those jobs out in North Dakota, those are by and large on private land. The production of oil in the United States today is up. The reason it's up is because we're producing it on private land. Oil production coming off federal lands where the President has control is down over 10% right now under this administration.
Tells you everything you need to know.
In a nutshell.
No question about it. Just to finish on Keystone Pipeline, then, do you believe that deadline was a good thing?
Absolutely.
To call the question, basically.
Absolutely. The other beauty there, though, Scott, this is driven by bipartisan support.
No, I agree with you.
One of the reasons it passed the Congress is it's got huge Democratic support for it. And I think the President's in a tough position now.
Any sense of which way he's going?
Well, I got to tell you, I was absolutely shocked that he punted the decision in the first place. As Prime Minister Harper, the Canadian Prime Minister, said, this is a no-brainer.
I know.
The fact this even came up is a bit surprising for everyone. And there's no reason. We just call on the President, do the right thing, Mr. President, support American jobs.
I think there's a silver lining in this, too. And the fact is that it seems to have brought some of the energy issues to the forefront. We're hearing a lot more about Keystone XL Pipeline as part of a payroll tax cut debate. And people are starting to, it's awakened this issue a little bit to be part of the presidential campaign and the dinner table conversation in this country, hasn't it?
Absolutely. In fact, Scott, last week we launched a new campaign that's called voteforenergy.org. energy.org. Vote for number 4 energy.org. And what we're trying to do is we believe the energy debate should be front and center in this presidential race, in the congressional races, and in state races. Why? The United States is the energy richest nation in the world. We have more energy in the United States than Libya, Iran, Iraq, and Kuwait combined. And yet, because of governmental policies, we're still importing a lot of energy. We could put our own people to work, make us energy secure in this nation, generate billions of dollars in revenue to our state and federal coffers at a time we need it most. All we need is the political will to do it. So we're encouraging the public, get engaged, talk about energy. Let's make it a top-line issue in this debate. Let's get these politicians to focus on it because we can create jobs and we can help become more energy secure.
Who of this GOP field do you think is getting it best? I know I've had many conversations over the years specifically about the North Dakota example with Newt Gingrich.
Yes.
And he seems to be elevating it a little bit. Is Newt best of the field as far as voicing energy issues? Romney's obviously strong so far. Are you confident where he's? Just give me your play card on each of them.
Well, thus far on the candidates on the Republican side, with the exception of John Huntsman, who for whatever reason keeps talking about issues related to the oil industry that just aren't factual. So I'm not quite sure where he's coming down. But the rest of them, I've talked to Newt a couple times about this, talked to Mitt Romney about it, talked to Rick Santorum. We, by and large, have talked to all these candidates, and they have varying degrees of where they are, but overall they get it. They understand it. And frankly, I think it's a bright line discussion with the current occupant of the White House. This is something where we ought to have this debate. We need to get around energy policy as a huge job creator. So.
You're never going to bring this administration around, though, are you? I mean, given their...
It's been frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, if they claim to, it's like somebody said, I've never known somebody to love jobs so much but hate the people that create them, and your industry creates them, and you hire at twice the national manufacturing average. Hello,
yeah.
This is like Tim Pawlenty said to me last night. A 10-year-old could figure this out.
That's right.
So I mean, there's no reforming them, is there? There's no getting around that.
We're going to keep the pressure on all of them, and particularly the current occupant of the White House. Today, the oil and gas industry in the United States supports 9.2 million American jobs. Recent economic analysis shows we could create another million jobs in the United States in the next 7 years if given the opportunity to produce America's oil and natural gas. So we haven't given up on anybody, and we're going to turn the heat on everybody. This is a big issue. Energy should be front and center in this entire debate.
And you have the argument on the economy without question. And as you say, it's obvious. I think you have a fabulous national security argument as well. And this
Absolutely.
Situation with Iran is a great example right now. We have a very tenuous situation with Iran, largely because of the ports they control and the shipment of oil. But most of that oil goes to China. If we had more domestic energy production, we'd have to worry about that less, wouldn't we?
Yeah, well, one of the great ironies, and not to be unkind to anybody, but if you look at the Chinese, what they're doing around the world today, they are securing their energy future. They just went into Canada last week and secured a major piece of the oil sands. They're buying shale gas production in the United States.
From Chesapeake and others.
That's right. Yep. They're off the coast of Cuba. They're getting ready to drill. The Chinese, working with the Cubans, will drill closer to the coast of Florida than we as Americans can. Why? Because that's their interest, and those are Cuban waters. So we're prohibitive producing the very energy that others, including the Chinese, are looking at. And that's not Chinese bashing. That's just fundamentally saying they get it. They understand it. And we're over here twiddling our thumbs having conversations about, gee, is the Keystone XL pipeline good or not? Of course it is. It's a no-brainer. We just got to make the decision, make it happen.
Okay, just a dumb radio guy here, right? But I got to ask you a question. Why is it that we are as beholden as we are to the world market on oil? In other words, right now, if you look at what the United States produces, what Canada produces, and what Mexico produces, do we need the rest of the world in oil?
Well,
I mean, could there ever be such a thing as a North American price for oil?
Absolutely. In fact, as you know, the oil price, crude oil price, is established on a global basis. But with modern technologies, the recent developments that have occurred in places like North Dakota with horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing, in the next 15 years, if we could develop the oil and gas we have in the United States, couple that with a pipeline from Canada, allow them to develop their resource, and the amount of renewables that we think are coming online domestically, we could be energy secure in 15 years. By 2026, all of our liquid fuels from oil and natural gas would come from the North American continent. So when we start having conversations in the Middle East with the Iranians over nuclear issues and they threaten to close the Straits of Hormuz,
let them.
It'd be a yawner.
Yeah.
We'd just say, well, we've got our energy security, and we'd have to look at it from a global, international, geopolitical perspective, but not about energy.
But it would still affect the price of oil. That's
absolutely
right. I mean, that's the only difficulty there. They'd still have that news because we'd have more supply, but they'd still have it. Is there any way to separate, what their oil is traded at versus what North American oil is, to get out of that game of having that kind of control over our price of oil?
Well, it's the fundamental laws of supply and demand, and what we need to remember always is there are certain levels of price that those that produce oil in the Middle East are looking for to satisfy their own constituencies. But if we're producing vastly more here in the United States, it will put significant downward pressure on that global price. And if that's what our ultimate aim is, which it should be, create jobs here, generate revenue here, make us more energy secure, and at the same time bring the price down. If you look at the shale gas operations, just go south of here in the great state of Pennsylvania. We've created 90,000 jobs there in the last 18 months.
And look what it's done to the price of natural gas.
Well,
more supply. So I guess you're making the point that by more supply, we're gonna affect the price the right way.
Well, and the other thing we shouldn't forget about is the benefit to consumer because of the added supply. I was with Governor Corbett down there. He told me they have now saved their domestic consumers $245 million because they brought the price of natural gas down. It's pretty fundamental. It's economics 101. Bring more supply to the marketplace. It's clear we have lots of supply to do that. We've just got to have the political courage to make it happen.
Let's talk about a couple of things that stand in the way of that. One is regulation. And we've seen an effort by the Obama administration to say we know better than the states on regulating hydraulic fracturing, as an example.
Yep.
North Dakota's a prime example. I mean, where the water is versus where the oil is, I mean, this is, again, basic geology would tell you there's nothing to worry about here, for crying out loud. Yet, they still try to claim that this is a problem. Is that just an end around? I mean, are they using the debate over hydraulic fracturing to stop fossil fuel development, their ultimate goal?
Well, in some ways, what you see across the country is the states are very active. The oil and gas industry is a highly regulated industry. Secretary Salazar, that works for President Obama, talks about that often, particularly in his public comments and his testimony on Capitol Hill. So the first thing the public needs to understand, we are highly regulated. We're not void of regulation. But the states do it the best. And why do they do it best? Because these shale formations, North Dakota is different than Pennsylvania. The topography is different, the water tables are different, the localities are different.
Different than Wyoming. For crying, I mean, a state and a half away.
Yeah. And so if you get the federal government involved, if you bring the EPA in, what you're trying to do is create a one-size-fits-all, and it doesn't work that way. And so you begin to crank down the standards such to where you're imposing or putting such a burden on the very production, you create uncertainty, and now those resource and those investment dollars will go elsewhere. Those governors in those states who are developing those resources, they're very confident and comfortable with their ability to regulate it, and they live in those communities. They know much better than Washington does about what they need to protect their citizens.
Wyoming. Was that all about the EPA being able to say, see, we told you so? I mean, you talk to Wyoming officials, they say, look, there's been contamination of that water long before there was hydraulic fracturing, long before, I mean, they have issues with their water in that particular area, but it seems like the EPA, wanted to go, aha, finally, we got you.
Well, what's remarkable about the situation in Wyoming, Scott, and it's really unconscionable in my view, they went out, some had raised concerns over water wells, so they tested all the water wells that the locals were consuming, found no traces, no impacts at all from oil and gas drilling. So they went elsewhere to drill 2 test wells. They drilled down into a gas structure, into a gas stream, and then acted surprised they found natural gas. We could have told them that before they ever drilled the wells. When you drill deep into a gas stream, you can find natural gas. And they've tried to create this aha moment to suggest the two are linked. Nothing's further from the truth. The study wasn't peer-reviewed. Even Lisa Jackson, the administrator of the EPA, says, well, we probably didn't do that too well. But the problem is some of the critics of the industry who don't want any oil and gas production, who'd prefer that we don't produce and consume that energy.
Their base in the Obama administration.
They have gone out now and they're trying to suggest we're hurting groundwater issues, and that's just not true. It's fundamentally wrong.
But of course, it's a great soundbite.
Of course,
they've got what they want. The dirty water. The age-old game. But do we win that battle? Do you believe just by basic facts and science?
Ultimately, I think we will. It's going to require a lot of effort on the part of the industry. We're in all these states now. We're working with localities. We're calling town halls together. We're talking to the local citizenry and to allay some of the concerns that a very very small minority of shrill critics are trying to generate, because they're fundamentally opposed to this. They just need to be honest and say they're opposed, and then we'll deal with the reality. But the people get it. The locals get it, and I believe long-term we'll continue to produce.
All right, we talked regulation. Let's go to taxation. We're chatting with Jack Gerard, President and CEO of the American Petroleum Institute, on the state of American energy, and talking to folks in the heartland of America about an island of prosperity created by this industry as a prime example of this. Let's talk taxation for a second. Again, insatiable appetite for what? More money. They want to single out the oil and gas industry and, among other things, change the way you expense things. Have we won that battle, or is that one yet to be won as well?
Well, I think we have to be vigilant in making sure we're pushing back on some of these cockamamie ideas. If you could imagine the President of the United States, he has identified 5 companies that he is trying to punish with changed taxation policy. The great irony of this, the 5 companies that he has identified are already some of the highest effective taxpayers in this country. The oil and natural gas industry today contributes $86 million a day to the federal treasury. We pay an effective tax rate of 41%. The average other industries pay 26%.
And it's not enough for him.
Well, and so who do they single out? So it's a backhanded way, if you will, to get at another agenda, to slow down oil and natural gas production. You can tax it right out of the marketplace. The great problem with this, Scott, is what it does is it raises the cost of producing oil and gas in the United States. To
the consumer. I mean, ultimately, they're going to pay that price, right?
To the consumer and to the general function of producing energy, thus creating jobs.
Yeah, so in other words, if these companies have to pay more, they are going to hire less.
Well, or they go elsewhere. They'll still invest money. Look at what happened when they imposed a moratorium on the Gulf of Mexico. We just released a study last week. 11 rigs left the Gulf.
Yeah. How many have come back?
Very few of those 11 that have left. But they've gone to Angola, they've gone to Brazil, they've gone other places. It was over $11 billion that we lost in investment in the Gulf of Mexico.
There's simple economics again, because you're going to. What are you going to do with capital? You're going to go where you get to the best rate of return. Yeah, and and those rigs are not cheap to move, so they move them. No matter what you do, it take a while to get them back.
The operations of those rigs run about $500,000 a day. And those are great jobs. The average job in the Gulf of Mexico is over $90,000. And these are the type of jobs we aspire to have.
I interrupted you in the middle of the answer about the who they're targeting. Basically, what they're doing is singling out and saying, okay, you folks who are already paying more than your manufacturing brothers, we want to actually go even more. We want to single you out and take away from you tax provisions that other companies have.
Yeah, one of the other great ironies in this is they keep talking about oil and gas subsidies. The oil and gas industry does not get any subsidies from the U.S. tax code. What we get are cost of recovery provisions, just like every other industry gets.
Give me an example of that. That'd be like if I manufacture widgets for a living and I need to go out and buy a lot of equipment to be able to make those widgets, I can expense that.
That's right. Section 199, and that's the section in the tax code that we're referencing here, is a manufacturing deduction. Section 199 was enacted in the early 2003 window to encourage the creation of American jobs and try to retain jobs here. At the time, all those jobs were being exported across the world. They proposed repealing Section 199 just for the oil and gas industry.
And again,
everybody else, Microsoft, Google, everybody else who gets this, including the New York Times, they won't promote repealing it only for the oil and gas industry. It's punitive, it's discriminatory, and it's bad tax policy.
And the worst part of it is it'll mean less jobs created.
Absolutely.
And a higher price for the price of gas.
Absolutely.
To the consumer. Amazing. Okay, so we covered taxation. Let's go to one that I think has not received the attention it should. The Obama Justice Department hauled 7 oil companies into criminal federal court over 28 dead birds. Never in my life have I heard of something so ridiculous. Here we are in the middle of a horrible economic situation. You've got an industry that's creating jobs. They're getting it on regulation, they're getting it on taxation, and they're getting it criminally. Is that not absurd?
Well, in our book it is. I mean, we have to be very careful what we talk about with those legal proceedings, but I think you've hit something on the head here, Scott. When people look at the broader agenda and they look at the philosophy of the administration, in many ways, they talk positively. They talk positively about natural gas, but there are 6 different federal agencies today regulating and reviewing and scrutinizing natural gas. They're not coordinated. The EPA's off doing their own thing. Now we have the Forest Service looking at forest lands, ready to create yet a different standard. The BLM in the West has created different.
And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife flying around in helicopters trying to find dead birds. Is that not crazy?
It's hard to respond to that. It's just we're in an environment where we've got to change. We need a course correction. We can't keep going the way we're going today and expect to create jobs and produce energy.
By the way, coincidentally, windmills are exempt from the very same situation that the oil and gas. And again, these companies are great. They'd go out of their way to make sure this doesn't happen.
We need all the energy we can get.
Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable. But I mean, what I'm saying is, here windmills are exempt from the very same thing they're hauling oil companies into federal criminal court over. It's just, as you say, the preponderance of evidence there says look, let's get at this. What's their real motive? And that's what I'm coming to next. Yeah. Is it a green agenda? Is it to say, hey, we don't want fossil fuels, and if we punish them, if we're punitive against them, it'll help the other, whether it be, the windmills or, all the other green alternatives.
Well, I know, Scott, they're very sensitive when we make comments like that, but I'll tell you, you just look at the actions. In the State of the Union 1 year ago, the President essentially announced that the oil and natural gas industry is yesterday's energy. Well, guess what? 61% of all the energy we consume in the United States today is oil and natural gas. His own people at the Department of Energy will tell you by the year 2035, 55% of all the energy we consume in the United States will still be oil and natural gas. And yet he made a declaration, we were yesterday's energy. So let's go out and tax them. Let's change their financial structure. Let's discourage the investment in the United States. So while out of one side of their mouth they say positive things about job creation, the Keystone Pipeline is going to be a key issue. Yeah. We're right down to the point to say, are you interested in jobs or aren't you? Happens to be the oil and gas industry, but the question is, Mr. President, if you want jobs, with your single decision, we can immediately create 20,000. And the great irony, there's a project labor agreement on that pipeline, which means those are all union jobs. Those are his people, and that's what's got him in a quandary right now. We don't believe those should even be considerations. It should boil down to, is this in the national interest? And clearly it is.
Final question. How do we use North Dakota, the North Dakota example, if you will, as a laboratory to say, hey, we can do this. We can do it responsibly as far as the environment is concerned. We can create jobs. We can bring down the price of oil. It fixes so many things. And by the way, no coincidence that in the oil patch, the unemployment rate's about 1%. I mean, it's 3% statewide, but it's literally about 1.7% in the oil patch. How do you think we can better use that example to tell this story?
Well, I think folks like yourself who've been talking about it are key here, because once the American people understand the facts, and that's the reason we've launched this Vote for Energy campaign. We just want the public educated, and we want them to weigh in. We're not telling them how to think about these issues. We're just putting the facts before them. And when people hear about that North Dakota experience, they are amazed, and they say, we want that to happen everywhere. And it can. We're now in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Colorado, Arkansas. This is a game-changing phenomenon, and it's everything we need at this time. New jobs, new revenue, and energy/national security. It's a triple win for us, and all we need is some leadership out of the White House. And we can take that little North Dakota example, and we can replicate that across the United States.
Well, you're a great champion for that cause, and it's changing lives. It's changing
Absolutely.
Lives right now as we speak. There's lives being transformed, youngsters, and
Absolutely.
You and I were talking about that before we went on the air. Think about that. You've got the amount of folks out there that are willing to roll up the sleeves and go to work, and it's a great example of what an industry can do to help.
We've got young men and women, as I mentioned to you earlier, Scott, that are there that have high school degrees who are making close to $100,000 a year. They're making twice what mom and dad are. These are good jobs. This is exactly what we need. Give the Americans the opportunity to lift themselves. And in a capitalist free market economy, this is the way to do it. We don't need government handouts. We don't need government stimulus programs. All we need is the government to get out of the way. And when they get out of the way and come in and regulate appropriately and not try to penalize successful industries, we can take the lid off this thing. It's good for the country. It's good for all America. And we hope these presidential candidates will keep talking about it.
Great test will be in February on that Keystone decision.
It will be.
The date again is when?
February 21. By then, the president needs to make a decision.
Mark it on your calendars, folks. Jack Gerard, President and CEO of the American Petroleum Institute. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you, Scott. Good to be on with you.